Most, if not all of you, know that I was raised in Kansas. I was raised, I sometimes say, where Dorothy was before the tornado, which means out on the plains. The ones we sing about when we sing the amber waves of grain, wheat, miles of it. It must have been someone raised near big water, or here in the land of 10,000 lakes who wrote that lyric, who looked out over a golden wheat field and was reminded of a lake or a sea. For me, on the other hand, it was reversed. I saw the fields first and was wont to stand overlooking the miles of blowing wheat and prairie grass and easily imagine them as the vast sea that once covered the plains, the depths of water filled with moving mysteries. This parable takes me home to the smell of wheat, the dust of harvest, the sweat and chaff and raised up black dirt everywhere, even in your teeth. The time of year, summer and no school and up to minor mischief, the harvest crews passing through town just long enough to mount those giant combines and comb through the fields like prehistoric beasts, shearing the earth, the long golden stalks of grain falling and leaving behind this bright stubble, as smooth and uniform as my little brother's velvety barber cut. And oh, what that dust does. What it does as it rises into the edges of twilight. Sunsets over a wheat field in harvest season these days are too beautiful to be believed. This is the age of Photoshop. We are certain that the electric peach is enhanced, suspicious of the neon aqua and the streaks of glowing magenta. Nonetheless, I have seen it with my eyes. I have seen it reflected in the eyes of that little barbered brother and of all my fellow plains people. The sky filled with clouds and color and light. It's the feeling of looking at that sky that I feel when I sing, "Oh Lord my God, when I in awesome wonder consider all the worlds thy hands have made." That's how the sky at harvest feels to me. And beneath that sky, field upon field of wheat and weeds. When I look at that photo of the combines moving through the fields that you saw at the beginning, Cassie, would you show it for a minute while I talk, just so those who might not have seen it can see it? When I look at this photo of these vintage combines moving through the field, I wonder about their place in the parable that we heard and read a few minutes ago. By the time you are harvesting in one of those combines, you have long dealt with what is underneath. You have dealt with, as completely as you were able, with the weeds. You've taken as much control as possible over this field. You will have plowed up whatever happened here before. You will have prepared that plowed field, removing stones, adding fertilizer, and if you live in northwest Kansas, mechanically adding water regularly and often. You will have planted. You will have applied any and every sort of weed killer you knew how to use without affecting the quality of your grain and your world. By the time of harvest, you will be long past the time of sorting out which is which of the pictures beneath, and you will be moving on to collecting the fruit of your labors. With wisdom and a commitment to sustainable relationship with the land, this is evidently a very good way to grow and harvest wheat. Okay, Cassie. You may have done a wonderful job with the wheat. You may have annihilated the weeds. So, in our fields of grain and if we are talking about grain and creeping Charlie in in lawns, which are fields we don't eat. All of this seems to be a pretty good plan. However, when human beings, metaphorically, become the field and the plants, we had best take care. We are not meant to harvest one another. We are not here for each other's use. This parable poses a seemingly simple question. What are we to do with weeds? Now, behind it sits a very large question. Where do the weeds come from? Our common sense tells us to pull them up, but behind that is the knowledge that they keep coming back. And what are we trying to do here? We're trying to grow a healthy crop with great yield. And of course, this is not only about agriculture, it is about us. What do we do with evil, with sin, the seriously inviting the not God? And when do we do what we do about sin? When what we are trying to do is live here together with healthy relationships with one another and equitable access to the world, what are we to do? The parable itself sits right between the one we looked at last week, that one that is so wonderfully fertile. Go and plant, it tells us. Be seed, be soil, be planters, be. Go, multiply, spread, go, grow. And just around the corner after this parable, we will hear about mustard seeds and yeast. Tiny, tiny spores and seeds of beginnings that spread throughout whatever they inhabit. The message is go stealthily, relentlessly, quietly. All of these illustrations of what it is like for the reign of God to arrive. These are all kingdom of heaven teachings. They are, what if God's best ideas were the governing principles of everything? How would that look? That's what kinds of teachings these are. Evidently, the kingdom of God shows up here and now full of wheat and weeds. The kingdom of God shows up full of good and evil, growing side by side. Whither do we go from your spirit? In heaven thou art there, in hell thou art also there. It is not all one or the other. And this delights me. I certainly do not experience this life as all one way or the other. To try to make it so confuses us. It delights me too that this parable is structured in the way that it is, how its form, for me, echoes its message. Now, I will take full accountability for this. Full disclosure, this may be my own outlandish idea. I have not seen it from another scholar, but I am compelled this morning, in the midst of our lives, to notice this. This parable says, let the weeds grow right beside the wheat. And then the interpretation of the parable, which is attributed to Jesus, but scholars say most certainly was added later, sits there right beside it. And they have grown there side by side for centuries. And I will tell you that I strongly suspect that the interpretation part that was attributed to Jesus but added later is a weed. Why do I say that? Well, first of all, let me tell you a little bit about the particular weeds that are in this parable. These weeds in this wheat field are a particular kind of weed. It's called darnel. Darnel is an invader of a wheat field because when it's planted, it fits right in. It looks almost exactly like wheat when the plants are young. However, there are problems. Number one, the roots of darnel tangle into the wheat roots very quickly, so you cannot uproot darnel without uprooting the wheat. Hence, you have to let it grow to preserve the roots of the wheat. Two, Darnel cross-pollinates with wheat, and the nature of the whole crop will be changed if it cross-pollinates successfully. 3, the time for harvest, darnel has nothing wholesome to offer. Nobody eats it without impunity. The wheat kernel, it in fact can become toxic. While the wheat kernels swell and pack with energies, the darnel kernels open to a whole different kind of seed, and it's not wholesome for us. In great quantities, it's intoxicating, and not evidently in a good way. There are laws on the books of ancient times that have been found that mention that it is a criminal action to sow darnel into a neighbor's field. It was a problem. It was an act of vandalism in the ancient world to toss a bunch of darnel seeds into your enemy's field. The point is that if you're growing wheat, darnel is destructive. And at the same time, darnel happens, especially when you're growing wheat. You plant well, the weeds come. The enemy plants them in the night. We could spend a long time attempting to agree on what that means. What is evil? Where does it come from? And what about Satan? Is Satan as real as God? What does God have to do with it? It seems to me that this second part of this reading is a long time ago people's attempt to sort out which were the wheat and the weeds and begin the harvest, which is pretty much exactly the opposite of what the original parable teaches. That's why I call this second part a weed, or I suspect it may be a weed that has been growing beside the wheat of the parable for centuries. Perhaps nearly 2,000 years ago, it was difficult to tell that this interpretation of the parable would lead to a way of seeing good people, like us, of course, as the wheat, and weed people, those others than us, of course, as not only disposable, but pernicious, and our job to bundle and burn. Today it's clear this sounds nothing like the teachings of Jesus. That's why it seems to me that this parable itself is much like its topic, one part of it wheat, and one part of it seems to me at this point, to the best of my human understanding, a weed. It seems to me, at this point, just now, and who am I to understand? With all of my intentions and learnings and experiences, with my Wesleyan quadrilateral, with this parable in front of me, is it time to call judgment? No. That much is clear. The harvest is not ours. It belongs to God, which does not make us passive. Our work is in the growing field. Our work is among the weeds and the wheat. Our work is knowing that we cannot and will not always know one from another. And so we must take care. We keep watch over the fields, in the world, and even in the world of our interiors as we continue to grow. We uproot some ideas as they clearly become unwanted. We encourage others. We do this with the help of our community, with our relationship with God. And over us all, the sky, in a sense, holds the insistent, persistent, mighty protection of love. Beneath us, the ground of being, the earth, if you will, the divine commitment to keep the beloved thriving and rooted deep. In this parable and in our world, the unconditional value of life is non-negotiable. Even when we know there's evil that grows in the field of the world, there are weeds in our wheat. There's so much death and fear and violence lately that evil seems so much more real than ever. And yet it is not ours to call the harvest at our own whim. There is growing time behind us, and there is growing time ahead. God only, and I mean that, God only knows what will grow out of now, how and who we will be as we emerge. So let us be more of the field in this parable than of the combine crew. Let us spend our energies on the business of growing to our utmost and encouraging the same in those around us, knowing that it is in the long run that all may yet be set right upon this earth. That the kingdom is here and now among us, and yet comes. And yet comes. May it be so. Amen.